All right, guys, we are back again. We have today with an interview with the amazing Dr. Taylor Burrowes. Taylor, this is like we were just talking briefly off screen. I mean, we've been in each other's circle on Twitter since I think at least 5 years ago. I mean, it really has to go back to 2017, and I just can't believe that it's taken this long for there to be a meeting between the two of us. And I'm really excited to have you on here. I'm really excited to pick your brain. I know that I've had a couple of guys who I've worked with who've also, worked with you on some things, and it's just been like incredible stories about the experience of working with you and what you offered. So I think this is going to be great. This is going to be great for people to see.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm so excited too. Yeah, can't believe it's been 5 years.
Yeah. So I'm gonna start off with, and you got into some drama recently on Twitter. You got a couple of different topics, and we actually I would like to get into some of those topics, especially the one about the friends, right? But the the main thing here, though, that I'm always, by the way, astounded at how polite you are to people. You really you've got that like integrated feminine of like having strong boundaries yet still being sweet. Whereas like I don't I'm like fuck off too much with people.
There was a learning curve for sure.
But one of the things that I think has been really interesting, so you I mean, you have a PhD in it. I mean, you really went through the official channels in practicing clinical psychology, and you left that field. And this is, I think, really interesting because there's first off, when you have a coach, right? And by the way, for everybody, I should have given this introduction. I almost just take it for granted because you're such a presence. But, you know, Taylor works with men and women, getting them, the relationships that they want in life, right? Really incredible coach. Is there anything that you want to particularly mention with that, Taylor, about how you sort of self-describe? Because I just kind of,
No, I mean, honestly, I don't like labels. So I like to work with people with a broad stroke because it's not always just single people trying to get in a relationship or a couple people who are trying to improve their relationship problems. It can be general, like dissatisfaction with life. Obviously, I'm not a therapist anymore, so I'm not doing therapy with anybody, but I do help people with their family issues or just guidance in general of where they want to go in life. Because some people are just kind of aimless, listless, and lost. And so they need a mentor, really. It's a mentorship or even an apprenticeship sometimes where they need that role modeling. And I'm happy to provide that for them if that's what they want and that's what they're seeking.
Mm. So one of the things that I'm sure maybe it's been a little bit different for you because you do kind of wear both hats with this, but one of the things that I've experienced a lot as a coach is, well, how is this different from therapy? Should I just go to see a therapist? And don't get me wrong, there are some really good therapists. In fact, in a couple weeks, I'm going to be talking, actually maybe about 1 week, I'll be talking to Mark Darien, who is a very good therapist. And but even I think he dropped out of the field. I have to get the details on that. But the one of the big questions here is like, therapy is in the system. Obviously, it has the benefit in many cases of having some insurance connection to it. But what is really the main difference that you see between therapy and coaching? And now, having moved out of therapy into coaching, what was the interest from your perspective in making that change? Because I don't think a lot of people are really clear on the distinctions.
It's an in-depth conversation for sure to explain. Um, to do it justice, let's hope I can. But I would say one thing that is important for people to know is that, first of all, my PhD, just to clarify, was not in clinical psychology. It was in marriage, couples, and family counseling.
Okay.
My master's was in mental health counseling, and I was licensed in both. So I had a dual license in mental health counseling and marriage, couples and family therapy. And the profession of counseling is actually different from the profession of psychology. And so I majored in psychology in undergrad, but then when I went to the dean, I told him what I wanted to do. And he's like, I don't think you want to do psychology. I think you want counseling. So then I went across the street to the other university, Loyola, and I felt much more comfortable under sort of the guise of what counseling was, which was more person-centered, a little less research focused, like in that realm. I wanted to work with people immediately, and a lot of clinical psych is more like science-based and research-based stuff. Anyway, the point being that coaching is almost now like the next step down, because counseling was invented to create a master's level way of providing mental health support. Mm-hmm. So clinical psychologists and counselors are to work together and under the psychiatrist. So it's a team approach, really. And depending on where you work, you play a different role, and depending on your modality and your specialty, you play a different role. Now, I was a PhD level counselor, so whatever that means, but I didn't have to. As a counselor, you don't need a PhD. And so now coaching has been invented, right? I didn't go through like literal channels to get a certification in coaching. I just consult basically as an expert that's retired, but it's easier to call it coaching. Now, I think that the biggest difference between the two is ruling out pathology. So someone who's seeking a coach, they may have, struggles with depressed mood or anxious thinking or stuff like that, but you're not treating a pathology in coaching. Therapy is to treat some disruption in their mental and behavioral health.
That's a really, really good way of putting it. I like, because I don't know if, well, you've had the experience of being in both camps, but every now and then I've had somebody, like, I'll be honest here. Okay. Like, I'm good at what I do, and I don't want to take away from that, but there are certain individuals that I just don't want to work with, right? They're really messed up. They're really messed up individuals. And it almost feels like you're doing constant triage, psychological triage with them. Yeah. It's difficult to make progress. They're not in enough of a foundational state to be able to really move forward. They haven't made certain decisions in their life to change necessarily. They're kind of looking on you to get me through this thing. I don't feel good. Right. So I learned from those guys, which for the most part, I was just really not equipped to work with and didn't have the inclination to work with. It's like, well, a lot of therapists are going to be seeing people like that who are really, really broken. And, and I would say, I always said for coaching, well, coaching, therapy is about dealing this isn't exactly right, but therapy is about dealing with the past. Therapy is about dealing with pain and problems that occurred in the past, and coaching is about moving forward. Of course, you have to go to the past in order to move forward, but that there was this difference of focus. But I think that the way you put it is actually better and more clear. Why are those people so focused on the past? Is because they actually have some kind of pathology that stops them from moving forward. Mm-hmm. So what made you decide to, not, I guess I assume, not renew certification or licensing to continue with it?
Oh yeah, there's a few different reasons. There's the practical reason, which was they really weren't modernized enough to allow for online work, right? Like the profession that was kind of slow to pick up on that. They weren't sure for a while what they were going to do before telehealth really came around. And because I was moving on to online predominantly, plus I was in between two countries. So I was licensed in both the States and the Cayman Islands, and they had different rules. Yeah. So, I followed what I needed to follow. When I was in the Cayman Islands, I followed Cayman Islands rules. But when I'm in the States, I followed the States rules. But if I were to be global, right, this is what people don't realize. once you're a licensed healthcare professional, you are bound by ethics and all the rules that go with it, no matter if you're not working intentionally or directly with a client, if that makes sense. If you
Mhm.
have a license, you will always be bound to those rules.
And so what would be the rules in particular that would?
Well, there's lots of rules, but when it comes to marketing a business and functioning like as a helper, talking to someone, having clients, they don't allow cross-jurisdiction
I gotcha.
work. So I was in Vietnam and Thailand and Indonesia and stuff speaking to clients, but I had already retired my licenses. So in order to do that, because I knew that's where I was going, I was like, you know what? Maybe I don't need my licenses. Maybe I can do what I'm doing as a coach. And I just have to have that mental shift of allowing myself to let go.
Yeah.
And that was the hardest part. But once I realized, you know, I'm not really losing, my PhD, I'm not losing the capacity to help people. I'm just not a licensed healthcare professional anymore, and I'm retiring.
And what's so interesting is that, I know that you don't get as much into it, which is smart, but just dealing with the whole sort of system collapse in general and how things are changing. I mean, when you look at coaching, like I almost feel like a little bad, not very bad, but I feel like almost a little bad about coaching because we have it. If you know what you're doing and you've established yourself, you really have it in a good position. Because as you said, you're dealing with people, not that people who don't have problems and don't have pain, but let's just say they're within the normal realm of psychology, right? They don't have pathology. And I'll make a statement here, and I'm curious what you think about it, but that there's been this trend in recent years for people to like everybody should have a therapist or whatever. And I don't really agree with that. I don't agree with that. I think it's based on the way that you put it. I mean, people who have like debilitating kind of mental health issues, they need to work through these kind of things with a therapist, someone who's going to be there. But a lot of regular people could benefit from a coach because that's more like moving them to the next level. So, but we have this kind of gift that we don't have to deal with a lot of those constraints, and we can expand and we can help a lot of people as a result without having to deal with a lot of the energy drain. I mean, yeah, anyway, people have, there's a lot of negative stuff people put out there about therapists, and I think that there's some of it's warranted, but they really do deal with a lot of, hurt people, damaged people, and they can be pretty draining. And I guess you've maybe seen both sides of the coin there.
Yeah, it's exhausting. I mean, people just call it burnout, but it goes well beyond burnout. It's almost like this spiritual existential crisis constantly, right? I mean, I remember battling good and evil with some of my, in my work, because people were in the throes of despair and they were battling like just intense stuff that I know you would understand, but maybe not everybody. And I laugh because whenever I get into it, I got into actually before this one this weekend, I got into it with therapist Twitter the other day because I made a kind of, it was half in jest, a joke about how therapy should be done by humanistic robots. And they didn't like that very much, obviously. But anyway, the point.
The apostate. You're an apostate.
Yeah, it's, I lost my train of thought now, but basically, I think, gosh, that a lot of these people take themselves so seriously now, right? Like, I just think it gets so intense because they have this conflict. It's like this incongruence. You literally, it's like an out of body experience being a therapist. You have to separate from your ego.
Yeah.
Right. And you're in there like just for the client's purpose. You're using this formalized system that you were trained in, that you've internalized, but you've left the room.
Mm-hmm.
And you're getting a lot from them, obviously, energetically, that can be really intense and very negative, their pain. And then you're told that you can't be yourself in a lot of ways. Like you can't actually be a human. You're expected to act like a therapist all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It can't exist that way. It's just not healthy for the professional. And they say go to your own therapy or get your supervision, but it's always behind closed doors. It's not like out in real life. And so you become very compartmentalized and split. And I noticed that about myself. And as I began to change and become less mainstream, fitting with all the whatever, just
Yeah.
mainstream stuff, I realized how bad that contrast was. And I was not able to be honest or authentic, and lots of things were happening. So everything kind of happened at one time, and I just realized how unhealthy. It's like the profession has gotten sick. There's a pathology in the profession.
Yeah. I've definitely seen that. And again, a lot of good therapists out there, a lot of good therapists, no doubt about it. But I have had some unnerving experiences where, I would talk to somebody who had been seeing a therapist for a couple of years, and then we'd have our first call, and they're like, I've never, like, it was like, it would blow them away. And it was like, how did you see someone for 2 years and not have some of that stuff get picked up? But I think a lot of the credentialism and the sort of, you have to learn and have to approach things in these certain ways. It's kind of stamped down any sort of individual problem solving creativity. And we see this in every single profession, healthcare in general, that there's a lot of, we're losing the creativity. It's a lot more of just mechanistic kind of, and that's, I guess, was your joke, right? That we should just replace it with these robots, because it's,
Yes.
how different does it become in some cases?
Exactly. And it's a do what I say, not what I do situation, because so many therapists are not living that way. They're
Yeah.
not actually healthy themselves. Yes, there are exceptions. There can be really great therapists out there. I feel like I know a lot of them because I have these conversations with them and they get it. But the defensive therapists who think they know it all and have that high and mighty outlook and just talk shit, smack about people, like those are the people that are in that incongruence, like that cognitive dissonance. I mean, they're in the thick of it. And I get it. I know how painful it is. I don't know if you know this, but I was also the deputy chair of the Mental Health Commission of the Cayman Islands for 7 years. So I wrote the mental health policy for our country. And it was very frustrating to be on that side of it too. And I got angry with the coaches, and we had meetings with insurance, and we had meeting with the hospital, and there wasn't like a coaching credentialing institution or anything. It was just like a bunch of coaches. And so we asked them to bring a representative to our meeting, and we were trying to figure out how to work with them, because it's a small country. And if they're taking a lot of clients from therapists and they're not regulated, how were they doing that? So we helped them work with us according to those guidelines that we use. But you can't do that in other countries, right? So
Yeah.
coaches doing whatever they want, and some of them are unethical
Yeah.
and working with people they shouldn't be working with. And I just got really frustrated because of all the overhead that therapists have as a healthcare provider. Like once I left my employer and I was working for myself, trying to get a facility, pay for all my license, I had zero money when I left my employment and went on my own. And I realized it just didn't make any sense. You're paying all this money. You're not able to charge as much because there's rules on how much you can charge. And you can't market yourself. So like there was nowhere to go. They were tying your hands to try to have an online business or any kind of business really. And anyway, so those are other reasons why I left. But
Yeah.
you see that conflict happening. It's like an overreach. They want to regulate businesses, but the true regulation of business is capitalism and your customers. If you do a good job, you get repeat business or more word of mouth business, or people just don't pay you.
Yeah. You have such an interesting life. I mean, like, how many people on Twitter have known you for years, knew that you were, in charge of the commission in the Cayman Islands. I want to get back to your own personal work and what you've been doing with men and women, but I just want to throw this out there real quick. I mean, I remember from years back, you used to be a newscaster too, right?
Yeah, for a year I was an anchor.
I saw some of those. You did such a good job on it. I mean, classic ENTP, right? Just your foot in everything. Was there, like, just real quick on personal life? I mean, so you grew up in the Cayman Islands. Is that like where you've been most of your?
I was in the States for school, so my father was Jamaican. He would be however old today, but he was born in 1914. So quick math, 108, I think. Is that it?
Okay.
Yeah. So he was Jamaican, and my mother met him in Jamaica at 19 on a job interview. She was in special education, and my dad was a very well-known doctor who had his own hospital. Like, he built and ran his own hospital. And she married him in like a month or so, like 6 weeks or something like that.
Yeah.
And that was his fourth wife, and he had a couple kids. The big story about that background is there was huge uprising in Jamaica in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
the rebel, guys were like doing all these massacres, and it was just gory as hell and dangerous. So my dad was very vocal about his political beliefs, very controversial. I'm so much like my dad. And he got a lot of flack for it because obviously all the rebels and everything, they had different ideas. His medical ethics were, he provided abortions. So he believed that all these young girls who were impregnated, raped, because there was a lot of rape and sexual assault, impregnated by their fathers or whatever, and they didn't want the baby, he would provide these abortions for these kids. That sounds really bad, but you know what I mean. They had the parental consent of someone, but he promoted that this was a good thing. And some people didn't like that. And there was a hit out on my family. This is before I was born. And they got the wrong family, and the family next door got massacred.
Wow.
And so they were very well to do at the time, but they left with the clothes on their back, basically, and went to Canada, because a lot of Jamaicans went to Canada, have very lax immigration laws, at least they did then, and started over for a couple of years. So he started working in the hospital, made some of his money back. And then he had already had like a practice in the Cayman Islands. He was already like a visiting doctor in the Cayman Islands, because back then in the 70s, or I think it was 75, Jamaica went independent. But before that, Cayman was actually a colony of Jamaica. And Jamaica was a colony of Britain, of the UK.
Interesting.
Yeah. So my dad went back and forth constantly, had a house, stuff like that. So when he had enough money, because Cayman was poor back then, right? It wasn't the rich Cayman Islands that we know now. He had enough money to start back over in Cayman Islands. Then we settled there, and I was born.
So Jamaica had Cayman as a colony, but then when it became independent, it remained as part of the crown and then became its own separate. And it's still part of the United Kingdom to this day.
Cayman Islands are still British. Yeah, I don't think they'll let go of that. It serves them well. So that's the story of the heritage. But when I was just very advanced. And like I said, Cayman was not like what people know now. It was very country, like very basic. And when I was 12, we moved to the States. So a lot of people went to boarding school, but my parents didn't want me to go to boarding school. So we just all moved to Miami. And I went to school, went to college, got my PhD, or was almost, I can't remember now the timing, but anyway, I was all done with my PhD except for the doctoral dissertation piece, the research part. And I asked my professors at the university, and I said, is it okay for me to now relocate and I can just do that remotely? And they said, go ahead. So then I moved back to the Cayman Islands, got my first real job. I had like a job in Miami, but this was like my first full employment. And then I was there for like 10 years again.
Wow. It's just such a crazy, I mean, my grandparents had a house in Jamaica, I think back in in the early 70s.
Nice.
I don't know the details about it, but I did know that, you know, there was the uprising, and which I guess was connected to the independence movement and everything. And yeah, I mean, you know, they're old wasps and everything, but they were like, it was really nice, it was perfectly safe, it was super safe, and then it was really not safe, and they were out. But other than spring break in college, I'd never been over there, and honestly, I would love to spend more time in the Caribbean. The Cayman Islands always look like, in particular, a really cool spot. But
well, the perfect thing for you to do, remember this, Pat, you're going to have it on video to remember it, is go to the Cayman Cookout, I think it's called. There's two, one is more fancy than the other. Go to the fancy one that's hosted at the Ritz or put on by the Ritz and Eric Repair.
mm-hmm.
And it's amazing, like all the wine and the food, the different events that they do, like top-notch, world-renowned event.
And this is like once a year, basically. They have this in the Caymans, and you just come down for it, and it's a big party. All right, I'll put that on the list. That's great. My wife is, you know, I'm very much a Four Seasons kind of person. I like the variety, but my wife would certainly move to the Cayman Islands in a second. So maybe maybe that'll be a perfect opportunity to trap myself down there.
Yeah, it's great. It's just a very high cost of living. But, you know, if you figure out a way to make that work, the lifestyle is amazing. It's just, yeah, I mean, when you're from there, it can be very claustrophobic. So
Sure.
it's good when you have
almost like everybody. I mean, because I always, you know, you kind of look like, based on the stuff that you've been in, you're almost like Cayman royalty. You know, it's.
I was for a period, for my era, you know, I would say, you know, now there are lots of people that don't know who I am, but I kind of like that. You know, what's interesting, though, is that some people are still reaching out to me from the Cayman Islands to work with me. And I love that. Like, they know I'm not a therapist, but they've heard about me and my coaching, knowing that I'm still like helping people. And so there's still ways to make or keep connections, even years down the road when you're doing good work like you. I mean, I put your name out there all the time. I know you do great work. So I really appreciate that too, working together or working, you know, it's like the progression with different things with people, or they know different people who need different things, and we can help a lot of people collectively.
So let's talk about your work. And I think what's one of the really interesting things is that you work with both men and women. And so you're able to see, I mean, we deal with these problems that are occurring in modern dating, modern relationships. And I think if you distill it down there, it's about, you know, how do men and women relate with each other? And I'm really curious, what are some of the things that you really see come up between, you know, your male clients versus your female clients, and where's the intersection of this stuff?
Yeah, I work more with men. I have a women's group and a men's group, and this is kind of a good overview. I have about 18 men in the men's group, and I
Mhm.
have four women in the women's group. So that's kind of how my whole caseload works. My roster is heavily populated with men. I think I work better with men
Mhm.
for reason. And the women that I work with, because I try to encourage them, even though they know I say this a lot, it's like the ones that I do work with, I love the ladies that I work with, but I find that it's rare to meet and connect with the right type of female clients. So anyway, that's a little bit of a disclaimer. So the work that I do with them is quite similar in regards to, you know, vetting, teaching them vetting, and if they're single, like how to learn to, you know, develop their weaknesses, you know, in the areas that they have been creating the same patterns and problems, sticky points in their previous relationships or in like connections, and obviously leveraging some of their strengths that they don't even give themselves credit for, or they don't really see. So really nurturing and inspiring them to emphasize those things. Like when I have a client who gets inspired professionally or vocationally or business wise, like they like start developing maybe their own coaching thing, or they start doing their own content creation. I love that. And it was repressed before. So those things are happening a lot as well, especially in the group setting that I have. So a lot of that, the clients that I work with, they'll do one-to-one and then they'll do the group, and then they'll stop the one-to-one after a while and maybe just do the group. But I have some long-time clients that have a lot of things to work through. And it's like, I like to do, a lot of great work quickly, but I don't focus on the speed. So it depends on the person. There are some people that need that longevity to really shed all the layers that have been keeping them restrained, or maybe they saw therapists before and they were being treated for depression, but then now we're taking a different focus, and it's like you fix, for lack of a better word, like you resolve these certain things, and like they start to blossom, they start to bloom into their full potential, and so they keep going because they want to get to more of the intricate stuff. Not just dating. Oftentimes in the process, they'll be like, maybe I don't need a relationship. Like, life is good right now. And I'm like, yes, that's great.
Yeah. That's the precursor to actually doing it really successfully.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And, it's also with clients, there are some individuals who, you have some people who come in, and I think this is especially with guys, so like okay, what's this step and this step and this step, they want the kind of linear approach to it. Like, if I check these boxes, I'm going to get here. Whereas, the reality is that change is, you do have external benchmarks that you can see, but it's almost like you realize them after the fact. The change happens and you're like, wait a minute, wow, I got this occurred. Wow. And so you have some individuals who they take the longer approach, because if you're really pacing somebody and working with them and where they're at, some people come to you and they're pretty much there. They just need that extra little piece. Some people come to you with a couple of pieces that they need, and sometimes in the process of them figuring out, because they have to internalize that piece themselves and put it there, it can take a longer period of time, which is why you can't like make a guarantee that it's going to take this long and only this long, because even if you or I would know what was missing, they have to know it.
Yes.
They have to feel it, and that be ready to receive it.
Yeah. With both groups, I would say neuroticism is a huge issue.
Yeah.
With a lot of the men that I work with, and a lot of the challenging women that I work with as well. I think there was a post, actually. Oh, I just remembered. There's a post that I made about what's harder to work, or who's harder to work with, the rigid woman.
Yeah.
And I think you picked the one that I didn't think it was. So that would be a good opportunity to talk about that here. So the real like immature feminine woman who's chaotic and emotionally like labile and all over the place, is the one that I think is more difficult to find resolution. But she's more pleasant to work with along the way, because she's warm, sweet, she's engaging, she's chatty, whatever. But when you hit those points of contention, when you do have to challenge, I've found with the ladies, and it could just be me, in the way that I have that, interplay with them, they don't end up going the whole way, and they resist, and they get really, I'm trying to be delicate, but I think, it's almost like I become the enemy. Whereas with a woman who is very rigid, she's already decided she wants help because she's coming to see me. So she's already opened that door and asked for help. So that rigidity has been cracked. And she's also very systematic. So all those neuroses that she has, she wants to put into asking for help and doing something differently. It's that masculine side of her that makes the work with men so much easier sometimes. right? So when I butt heads with a woman who's very rigid and has that masculine edge, it just takes a little of the finesse, but if she really wants to achieve the change that she wants, she will surrender. It's almost like she responds to, I don't know, it's a hard balance between masculine and feminine on my part when I'm working with women. It's a lot easier with men for me, but I find that the rigid women have a better chance of integrating than the really sort of all over the place women that I work with.
Well, this is super interesting, and if I can just venture here, you're extremely integrated. I mean, really, you are like an icon of where women would want to get to. I mean, you've had a slew of accomplishments, right? You're beautiful, you really know what you're doing, and you're really able to help people, and so you can tap into both of these energies. And I think that it makes a lot of sense to me that a woman who's maybe has a hard time surrendering and who's a bit more of a masculine, that may have actually been a lot of your journey as well.
Mm-hmm.
So those women can really relate to you, and they trust you because they know that you understand their journey. So they can almost surrender to you first, and then they can surrender to the masculine as a whole. You can pace them into it. Whereas for the women who are just sort of more in the lower level feminine, trying to get to integration, they have to bring in more masculine. They have an issue in general, and this is a thing in the entire coaching industry or self-help stuff. 70% of all sales go to women. Like women get this stuff, but women, in my observation, those women don't usually get the full results, so they're willing to spend more, but they don't get the full results. That's, I think, a problem across the board because they're resistant to the masculine in sense of being able, they're maybe drawn to it in a certain sense, but it's an unfamiliar energy to them. And I would venture that because of just the intrasexual competition, that there's probably more triggering that goes on with it. Because I've seen those women with men, like Matthew Hussey, if you're familiar with him.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's got a total, money-making machine right there. But he will, seduce and look, I don't actually want to, I'm not trying to trash him or anything. I actually do think he's helped out quite a few women. There's no question that he's like, a handsome guy with, the British accent and everything. And he spoon feeds it in this really delicate way. Do I think that most of those women go the full distance? Are they getting enough of the tough truth? Maybe not, right? But because of where it's coming from, they're so much more receptive to it because that's feminine energy is so much more about like, how do I feel?
Yeah.
If I feel okay with this, then I'm going to receive it. Versus, the masculine's like, you got a broken bone, and there's no way around it. We're gonna have to snap it back into place. So anyway, that's interesting though. It's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a couple of things that have happened that have been, even as an ex-therapist, that were surprising to me at the stuff that can come up. And I think it's because of the group format that I've created. It's constant. It's a 24/7, 365 days a year group, right? And so it's very intimate.
Mm-hmm.
And I have unearthed a lot of these things in people, because I call it an experiential modality. Basically, it's like you're creating this system where you're creating connections and relationships with people online in a supportive way, but also it's very confronting, the work you do, and it's intense. And the men, they love that. I mean, there's points when they don't, and there's problems there too, but for the most part, men love that vasopressin accomplishment, and women have a hard time with that tension. And I've even had like guest speakers come in, and I think I asked you once, but I knew that the timing was difficult. But Adam Lane Smith came in and he did a presentation or talk or whatever about conflict resolution and how females respond to conflict best and what to do. And it's still really hard for the ladies to deal with even just someone leaving, you know, every little rift. It's so intensified, and it's always like, what did I do? What did I do? And are you saying this about me? Like, I've had so many times when I've had to explain, my tweets are not about you. Like, even if we've talked this week, I have decades of information in my head, and as I'm getting all these, you know, catalysts around me, they solidify, and then I come up with an idea. And so I'm constantly putting out these fires of insecurity. You know, a lot. It's kind of intense. Yeah, I'll probably wean off of it at the end of the year.
Do you ever see, like, because you do have this, I mean, I think I heard something about you dabbling a bit in it, but like matchmaking with being able to pair these different groups together?
Yes. One is actively, they like moved country, well, far apart countries, and are in like that, you know, good solid position with each other where they have to just decide the next step because they're countries. But I'm still doing that with clients. I think that's the difference, because I've talked a bit to some traditional matchmakers, and their motto is, there's an ass for every saddle. And I have a database of like hundreds of people, and I will find you that saddle or that ass, right? And that's not my philosophy at all. My philosophy is very close, like intimate knowledge of having a client that I work with for a long time. And then I put you in touch with someone I think could be an ideal match. And you guys just have to figure out the chemistry bits. But I've done a few introductions, and I think they're going well, but it's not a numbers game. So it's a small amount of people that I'm actually matching. But the process that I put people through is very clarifying. So my actual profile that I've created, in my old life, I loved forms and questionnaires and that kind of stuff. So I'm really good at that. And just the process of going through that form with my client is like months of work. And so they get a lot out of it, even if they're not matched with someone or they stop working with me just after doing that. It's like I'm teaching them to do it themselves, right? Like, I'm sure like what you do with people is teaching them to make the better call and have the better judgment of who they're going to be with. So.
Yeah, no, 100%. You know, it's interesting with guys how, because what you were saying, I mean, it's so true. When guys do get into the coaching experience, they really, I mean, obviously not everybody, but you have most of them, if they get into it, they're gonna show up. They're gonna do the work. They can take the criticism. They can. It's almost like sometimes even want it, you know, and almost charges them like, tell me. But the flip side is, how many guys even get into it to begin with? And so this is the kind of paradox of the two sexes, is that I've seen, at least, is that you might have more women overall willing to get into things, but they won't really do much with it, or they have a hard time when someone's really telling them the truth. And so a lot of this, and I think this kind of goes back full circle to like the therapy angle, and how a lot of women on both ends become therapists or go to therapists just to kind of get that mutual validation from each other. And it's not really about making changes. It's just about like, someone's listening to me and they care about me.
Yes, I would say it becomes, at its worst, just enabling.
Yeah. Whereas guys, I mean, most of them just won't do anything to change their lives, and they're stubborn, and they kind of stagnate big time because of that. But then the ones that do decide to break out, and you know, a guy can play both roles at different points in his life. So he might decide he had enough, but they really do. It is actually, it's a pleasure to work with them. And I think that you agree, because they really do show up then. They're like, all right, I decided to get out of my, cave, and now I'm actually gonna do it.
Yeah. I've been
Yeah.
seeing you post a lot of your client testimonials lately too, and I think, I don't know about you, but the marketing part can be so hard to market yourself. But I'm like, I need to do that more. I'm glad you're doing it too, because those success stories happen, but we kind of, at least for me, I like internalize them and then I forget to like market them.
I even forget to ask most of the time. I mean, it's like something I'm like, God, you have to really think about it, because social proof is one of the big things. Like, you and I are both very intuitive, and I bet that, I mean, how much did a testimonial ever play? I mean, I'm not saying it never didn't play any role, but you probably knew from looking at somebody or some individual throughout your development, like, yeah, this is somebody who I want to work with. I want to learn from this person. You didn't need some other random person to tell you
Right.
to do it. And so we get into the trap of thinking that other people are going to think like us. Like, well, obviously, you know, me knowing what I'm doing is self-evident. And for other people, that's just not the case. Like, they need to hear, oh, somebody else got success, so then maybe I can get success from that person too. They can't. It's a blind spot, if we're being honest here. I mean, and so yeah, I'm like, fuck, I gotta start doing this more often. Like,
I'm glad you are. You're motivating me. I have like a little exit survey. So like when people are leaving, they're supposed to, go through these steps, and one of them is to send in the testimonial, but I never follow up. And I'm like, I don't want to harass them for it because they're just happy and living their life now. But some of them are inspired to do one. I want to get some video testimonials too. That'd be good. It's just hard because I know I would have a hard time wanting to go on camera. I don't, it's
yeah,
very.
yeah, it's always nice when someone does that, but it is a big ask. It is a big ask for people to have them put their face out there. But so let's dig in a little bit. So the guys that you've worked with, we'll do the women too after, but the guys you've worked with, what do you see as, obviously you've worked with guys at different stages of life with different problems, but is there something that just keeps coming up, and is there something that's really like that you see as a root cause of even a bunch of other different sort of specific pathology is not the right word, but specific issues?
One of them I would say is that inability to let go of their rose-colored glasses, right? Like I think that goes for both. But when I'm working one-to-one with a man, no matter how much they trust me, they respect my opinion, and we're doing other good work. So it's like they have a reason to dig in more and change things, but they get stuck in this pattern of wearing the rose-colored glasses with probably pathological women,
Mm-hmm.
right? And these men are very successful, they're attractive, they're fit, they've got everything else going for them, but they have this blind spot with women, and they can't imagine that a woman can stoop to that level or whatever, especially because they flip-flop. So when they're okay, they're great, they're fun, they're sweet, they're sending notes, but then something happens and the shit hits the fan and they're a nightmare and whatever. And so it's like that tendency to want to fix or do everything you can do to make it work
Mm-hmm.
really sort of draws them back in over and over and over again to a toxic relationship. Very much like Johnny Depp and Amber.
Yeah, the borderline. Yeah.
Yeah. So the group setting, I'm bringing this into the group setting. It's great to have the other perspectives of the gentlemen who've been through it before. It just helps. It's not just, even though I have the expertise to back it, it's a different phenomenon when they're hearing it from me one-to-one, but when they have to bring this to the group and the group shares their own stories, and then it's like, all right, you're right, it escalated, it got worse. I need to learn how to control myself and just say, and this is what I tell them, it's like, she can be a good person, but it doesn't make her stable or healthy, let
Yeah.
alone. So it's like they want to believe like the best of a woman, and they see her sweetness and they don't want to discount that. I'm like, you don't have to. She's just not stable. You have no evidence to prove to you that it's going to get any better. And it does continue to get worse and worse. And then they get into a position where it's like liabilities, like real big issues. And I'm like, we're here to help pull you out of this and learn how to have better judgment with women. Slow down, pace yourself, be more objective. It's like they have a hard time thinking they're going to be the bad guy if they're going to be more discerning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting, you know, especially because men get kind of caricatured negatively today, but this sort of sense about how guys are super selfish and, you know, do whatever. Obviously there are guys like that. You know, there's people in both sexes who are super selfish, but one of the things that you really understand when it comes to at least a huge number of men is, I would almost say, a pathological unselfishness,
Mm-hmm.
where they can't, you know, if a woman is attractive, and certainly if this, you know, the sex is good, but, you know, even in some cases when these two things are not even there, which is surprising, if the woman, doesn't matter how she treats him, if she is going to have problems from, like, if she's in pain, the guy has this just kind of impulse to help. And it's not necessarily this caricatured, like, you know, how they used to say in the red pill, Captain Save a Hoe kind of thing. It's not necessarily that caricatured. He may even not want to be with her, but he will still expose himself to her energy and try to help her because he just almost can't let her suffer the consequences of her actions.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, but it's got to be very, like, refreshing for these guys to have a woman be able to tell them that.
Yes. I think there's a lot of corrective experience happening from my side. Like they see a good balance of what they want to find in a woman. But also, like if they had an ex-wife or they had a mother, like they work out that a little bit with me as well, like having a healthy woman just to relate to generally. And then the group itself, like
Sure.
that experience of going through conflict and then finding resolution and communication, being accountable, all of that leadership and followership too. Like all of those themes get played out, and so they really develop themselves as a man in that way. And I know it sounds weird since I'm the facilitator of that, but it works out well because they step up, and I don't have like that strong arm over them,
Mhm.
collaborative. But yeah, it's I encourage them to find their male spaces too. But
Yeah, yeah. No, but it's very relieving because, you know, one of the difficulties, and I know we both really pushed back from the very beginning, and people take it for granted that in Twitter there is this broader, you know, non-combative dynamic between men and women, but people forget how we were there so early on,
yeah,
like really, you know, seeding that field when back in 2017, I mean, it was like the war of the sexes on steroids.
yeah,
And it's really important that guys understand that actually not all women are like that.
right, yeah,
and and you know, you can go back to, do we all have this sort of darker, you know, biologically centered part of ourselves that, like, is it, can we see images of that, you know, awful person in ourselves? Sure. I mean, that's self-awareness, but it doesn't mean that because, for instance, women are hypergamous, that women, the second a woman sees a guy who's more attractive or wealthy than you, she's going to immediately try to cheat. I mean, that is, and I know you, you know, this is like a severely traumatized woman
yes,
is going to
yes.
have that kind of attachment issue that she's going to jump, like, you know. Anyway, I'm curious about the women though. So what kind of things do women tend to fixate on with men? What kind of issues do they have with men?
The unavailable man, like
Yeah.
the classic emotionally unavailable man. This comes up a lot, and whether they're, you know, they're single young, or they're single 35 and older, or like they're divorced or whatever. I think a lot of this is where the whole alpha widow conversation comes into play too, because I see a nuanced view of that. But they glorify this unavailable man, and they chase, and they get addicted to the chase and that hope. So it's kind of like the flip side of it. And I see that often, that, you know, what I have to do is I have to ground them in the reality of like, but what are your priorities? Are you actually investing in what your priorities are? Or are you just investing in this thing that you really want to win over? Like, you want to get his attention, opportunity costs, you know, are you outcome independent? Like, all of these main concepts of my vetting system come to the surface, and it's like, nope, I'm not doing that. Nope, I'm not doing that. Okay. And then they might start to realize, okay, this is a repetitive thing that I do, and I'm definitely not following the system. And once they start to realize, again, the same sort of parallel, that they can be a good person, they're not intentionally or maliciously trying to harm you, and potentially maybe you could work out, you see the potential in them, and yes, everything lines up, you guys could be a great couple. But if he's not ready, and if he's not just connecting to you in that way, he's not present, he's got work to do. You can't force it, you can't fix him. So it's that the reciprocal issue, like in reverse for women, that I find breaking them out of that, taking the rose-colored glasses off, and recognizing that the man that is going to be better for you is someone who doesn't trigger that visceral response in you.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and you know, to your point about, well, maybe you guys could work out. The paradox is that you have to act as if you wouldn't, in order to see if there's going to be actually a change that occurs. Because then maybe they'll wake up, but otherwise the pattern continues.
Definitely. And you know, focusing on themselves, I think, is hard, because women have the ticking clock. And so they feel that urgency, like, I'm not doing anything, I'm just sitting here. And I try to help reframe that for them, so that they see you are doing things for yourself, you're developing yourself, you're becoming more emotionally aware and integrated and patient, and you're getting rid of the anxieties, your, you know, insecurities, you're using more critical thought, you're putting your energy into developing these other skills that men value in a wife, or right, like the things that you need to be when you are a wife and a mother. So you don't need to wait to do those things until you find the right person. Do them now, like develop those aspects of your personality, and it will help to bring that to the forefront. You don't have control over when you meet that person, but you have control of being ready when you do.
So, kind of related to this, so we talked about men and women, and you know, really the unavailable woman, the unavailable man, and how it creates a chase pursuit. And of course, each sex frames this chase in a different way, but you know, that they perceive it in a different way, and they're how they have to act in a different way. But it's fundamentally, if you look at it, it's like this individual, because they're not there, is desirable, right? It's a scarcity thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we say, okay, well, you don't want someone who's going to make you feel that way, or that person needs to, you know, you need to understand what's valuable to yourself, actually your goals, right? You have your system for that. And so these men and women can assess, is this individual actually emotionally available, and are they worth being with? It's kind of like, you want this person, okay, they still want to be desirable to you, but we want them to have more comfort, you know, have more of a secure attachment on playing games. How much does it come the other direction, though? When you have a guy who is with a woman, you know, there's a woman in the picture, and she's doing everything right. You know, she's great, but he's just not sure
Yes.
about it, right?
Yeah.
And of course we know about the women with, you know, the nice guys. We'll get into that next. But so with the men,
Yeah, that happens quite a bit. Currently, we're working through one of those cases. I use this idea of my 8 intimacies, which are needs of connection for a person, and some of them are with your significant other. Others maybe it depends on the person, but you can meet them on your own or in other areas. Quickly, they are affectional, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, sexual, physical, aesthetic, and social.
Mm-hmm.
And so, interestingly enough, that's a helpful tool with people that I work with because they realize, you know, my aesthetics are really important to me, which is like literature, art, anything of beauty that you can appreciate, cultural stuff. It's almost like spiritual, but spiritual is more specific to religion or something organized. And I'm not getting that from my partner, right? And so it helps you determine, okay, is all of this other stuff enough? Or is
Mm-hmm.
it really more of a deal breaker? And it's a hard position to be in when, it's good, but is it good enough?
Mm-hmm.
And they don't want to be the bad guy, especially, right? Like they don't want to turn away a good woman, but then when you reframe it and say, well, she's got a limited availability time to settle down, so you're doing her a favor if you make that call before too long. So really, I know it's going to hurt, but if you've done your work along the way and communicated and explored these things, then it's not going to be like you're blindsiding her. But that's what happens out there in the real world with people who
Yeah.
don't coaching, is they blindside each other, and that's where the real pain comes from.
Yeah. And it's, I guess it's a very similar thing for the women who happen to end up with a nice guy, and they're just not really feeling it.
Yeah, and they don't know why. They don't know why it's just off. I mean, it could be just that intangible thing, right? That you can't quite measure. But if it's missing something, you have to be honest about it, and you don't want to just perpetuate that kind of relationship. But you have to look for the whole package. It's just, and that's what when I use my logic plus desire plus love, I say like at least an 8 in each category. If you don't have around an 8, or at least if it fluctuates a little bit depending on how long you've been together or whatever,
Sure.
you're always working towards, keeping it around that level. You'll be fine. But if one drops significantly, or one is not present significantly more accurately, then it's just really, you can't compensate with like a large amount of desire if there's a lack of compatibility, for
Yeah.
instance.
Yeah, it starts to collapse the interaction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult because you have, and I think this is especially for guys who have been in, this Twitter community where you have, and I mean, I just call them what they are. I think a lot of them are LARP accounts and stuff like that. They don't,
What does LARP mean officially again?
live action role play.
Okay.
So, like years back, there's so like probably you don't really know, but there are video games, role-playing games. You have like a character, World of Warcraft, for instance. You have a character and you'd go and complete stuff, and so you could be like a level 8 wizard and you have all the. So there were people who got really into that sort of fantasy world, and then they actually created communities where they would um, do that stuff they did in video games in real life. And so they'd have like, it was literally called a LARP, a live action role play. And so you would be a level 8 wizard and you'd have, your bow and arrow, and it would have little foam ends on it, you hit people with it. And maybe there'd be a spell cast with it. And, in some ways it's kind of fascinating that there was enough generally group consensus that someone gets hit with the spell, they decide that they'll
Yeah.
voluntarily drop down rather than just like keep hitting you like, no, you're not supposed to do that, like ruin the game. But from what I heard about it, it wasn't, you know, too rough. But anyway, that's where it came from, and it's become basically a term though for people who are talking out of their ass. I think is pretty much the expression. You know, you're pretending you're something, you understand something, and you really have no meaningful experience with it. And a lot of we're in such a reactionary space that you have, and I have to deal with this all the time with guys, and it sounds like there's definitely a lot of overlap as well with it, with like the Madonna whore complex, and guys who really are all about like, I just really want to have a good girl who's going to do this and this and this. I'm like, yeah, well, you know, probably get her, and then you'll be frustrated because you're not being specific really about what they actually want, because they don't know or won't acknowledge it. And so then they have this situation where they end up with a girl who's just perfect. She checks all the boxes on paper, and yet they don't feel much of anything for them because there's no real sexual energy. And of course, sometimes this is compounded by the fact that she's a perfect girl, but she's not, you know, physically attractive enough for them. And they feel it comes down to the same thing, that there's not desire. And there's a lot of guilt, confusion about why that is, and negotiating, constantly trying to negotiate with themselves. But as you said, I mean, it's like they're wasting that girl's time. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
you're gonna try to force this. It's not gonna work. But what's interesting is if you're working with one of those individuals, they actually might be able to change some things, change a few things around, and then become very much more quickly than they would have thought a very desirable match, because there was just a few things, like you said, you know, they were below 8 in a couple of categories, 1 or 2, but if they could just push it up to there, then it's like everything else now locks in all of a sudden.
Yeah, and I think it's men, in my experience or from my understanding, they can get, I don't want to say complacent, but they can stay satisfied longer, like with things, you know, kind of the way they are. Whereas
Sure.
Women need that little bit of chaos and that excitement and just to stir the pot. And if you're not creating that intentionally by dating each other actively and keeping life interesting in a reciprocal way, then it can become a little bit destructive from the woman's side of things. But for men, like, you can be in that relationship that's mediocre or whatever, not quite good enough, for a long time, and put it off and put it off and put it off. But when you really confront, can I marry this woman? Do I see her as my wife and the future mother of my children? It's a realistic response for that, more realistic for them to be like, no, no, I can't quite get there. And it's hard to talk about that. Like, it's hard to say that with someone you care about deeply, that you've been with for a couple of years, hopefully not too long, but you know, it could be like a year or two. But you have to be honest about that. And men have more time. So it's good for them, but you have to figure out how to say the hard thing, keeping your integrity, and handle the emotion that you're going to get.
Yeah, and look, I'll be crass about it. I mean, if a girl doesn't maybe have that 8 in some categories for long-term stuff, but you know, they're cute, maybe the sex is decent, they get put in this slot, you know, the bang zone, I guess as it's called, and it's just a really kind of rough position, because the guy, it's not like he doesn't like the girl, it's not that he doesn't care about her, and it's not that he doesn't want to keep seeing her, but it's also like he doesn't want to move forward to that next level.
Right.
And yeah, there's a lot of stuff with guys needing to, because a guy also, I mean, you could say it's lack of character, but generally that's not really the issue. At least on a core level, it's more this, I would call it like a weakness or a cowardice, of being willing to say, yeah, I'm gonna end this. I don't want to continue with this, even though, you know, it's good for me. I don't want to do it because, you know, and that's, once a guy gets to that point, you know, it feels really good, and better things come into his life.
Yes.
Now, last question, because I know you got an event to go to in the next few minutes, but you have, as a woman yourself, but also from your experience with female clients, what is it, you know, you kind of alluded to it a bit in the last statement. You mentioned how women, if there isn't some kind of excitement, they're much more likely to, you know, they're more capricious. They're more likely to be like, okay, I'm not happy, things aren't great. But one of the things that's really interesting to me is how kind of abrupt some of this stuff is, and how extreme it is sometimes. And it's that a woman, everything seems to be going well in a relationship, and then it's almost as if maybe it's a lack of excitement, but it's just this doubt enters into a woman's mind, and it seems almost as if, like, almost without any thought, they just start to exit from everything. I'm wondering, I mean, I'm wondering if you can just speak on this, a little open-ended, but it's really interesting. Like, guys have such a really hard time with this, and I think they tend to project onto women that women are bad, or, you know, there's that term solipsism that gets thrown around, that women are just all about themselves. But I almost don't know that it's like, it's almost like it comes from outside the woman herself.
Interestingly, it sounds very similar to what we were just describing in men, just hearing you talk about that and the timing of that. You know, the man is not trying to be malicious by stringing this woman along, and he's in a better circumstance than she is, because she's, you know, she needs that time to move on and find a future husband. So him ending it is the better thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was subconscious for the man to put himself in that situation, right? Like, he wasn't intentionally dragging her along for a couple of years. Like, he wanted it to work out, but then he realized there's some incompatibilities, there's some things that are missing that he needs, and then he confronts that. I think it's the same thing, but in a feminine way, that
Yeah.
will attach to someone, connect with them. It's got a lot of good things about it, but as she goes along, she realized there's some really significant things missing. And this is more so when they haven't done the deep vetting, right? Because that's the preventative measure that really increases your chances of avoiding all of this stuff. But if they haven't, and this happens, then it doesn't mean that she's intentionally malicious or that she's solipsistic or whatever. But if the man can think about it from his mind and interpret the woman, I think it brings a lot of clarity for him. So recognizing that some of these things are just not, you weren't in the place to avoid it at the time. And the best thing to do is, once you figure that out, is to start to reflect and fill in the blanks. Like, what was it's kind of like with me in my first marriage, right? Like, I left the marriage, well, it's a much more complicated story, but let's just say there were just some things that were really wrong with the relationship that surfaced after I thought that
Yeah.
it's going to work out. Like, you don't get married assuming that you're going to divorce. So in that situation, it was kind of similar in that way. Like, it's never easy to I won't say never. I'm sure some women are malicious, but I think when it's unintentional, you're learning more about what you need. And the best thing to do is to just be able to communicate it and act on it when you know for sure you're in the wrong position, especially before kids.
Mm-hmm. Now I hope it's a quick one, but so when women in particular are younger, and I know that younger people in general do it, but this does seem to be more of like a thing that younger women, especially younger pretty women, they get a lot of attention, that there is this, like, everything is totally perfect. and there's no problem. And then it seems to happen really, really quickly. Now, is that some level, and I know you can't say it across the board, right? But is there like a big distinction between immaturity and like a traumatic response when you get down into it?
Well, what do you mean by, I just want a little bit more information. Like if everything's perfect, there's no problems, like meaning it's all comfortable or it's all exciting or what?
And so that's at least how it appears or it feels to the other person involved. Now, and I think this is a big question, is in your experience, does it just kind of happen suddenly for women, or is it like a seed of doubt that's been there from the very beginning that she kind of ignores, but it continues to get rain, and suddenly she's like, ah, it's here. All right, I'm done.
I think for women it happens more suddenly than it does for men. I think it happens more gradually for men. Not that it hasn't been there. It's just she's not been aware of it. I think once it comes to her consciousness, it can seem, it's like all of a sudden that can, and I would say a lot of that is just the immaturity and the lack of now what I call the integration and coming to that, working through your shadow and your polarity as a woman makes a huge difference. And that's why I don't encourage people to seek women, 25 and younger, but really looking at women who are, depending on their background, right? Like if they come from a community setting where it's very sort of healthy and they're modeled that healthy lifestyle. But generally speaking, a lot of changes can come up out of the blue with the woman. And yeah, you don't want to be blindsided with that. I have a lot of men who are, in their 40s and they're divorced and they're just like, they come to me because they want my sounding board so that they don't mess up and put themselves in a position where they have a lot of liability. And they want to get that younger woman because they want kids still, but really trying to help them see you can find the woman who is in her 30s and who, younger 30s if you want a lot of kids, and she's balanced, she's healthy, and she's not bringing a lot of baggage. But it's a lot more risky with the younger woman that you're just not sure of.
I think 100%, and 20s seems to be when a lot of women start to get that stuff sorted out, unless, of course, as you said, they're from a really good community that they're not going to accumulate as much stuff. Yeah. But there's all this stuff with older women, but I think it's actually that there's just a big divergence in that as women get older, they either really, really get it and they really, really know themselves, and they can be absolutely fantastic, radiant, right? And I think that you're one of those such women. Or they end up, really bitter and angry and resentful, and as usual, there's not a lot of nuance in the, in the broader manosphere. But, well, Taylor, I know you have to go. This was just amazing. I really so much appreciate your time, and I really love the opportunity to be able to connect. I want to obviously put your Twitter handle below, but where else should people be able to find you? What else do you have as an offering for people?
It's funny because I feel like I'm entering this stage of life where I'm going to be pulling back a bit, from social media and stuff. I'm not yet. So you can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter and YouTube. But ultimately, I think the best way I'll market this as my paid email coaching list, because I don't do a free newsletter. But this is an email coaching newsletter. So I send out the weekly newsletter like everybody else kind of sends out the newsletter, but then I encourage you to have a back and forth with me, and I'm basically on call for you. So it's a very low cost way of having me in your pocket. It's $25 a month. So I keep the is really small. So there's only like 60 people on the list right now, and half of them, if not more, are clients. So I have a lot of availability for you for very low investment. And obviously I share a lot of my insights in long form in the newsletter for the week. But that's probably the best way to stay in touch with me with longevity, because who knows what's going to happen on social media. And as I wean off of it a little bit, just to have focus on my other priorities.
Well, I want to put all those stuff in the description below, and make sure you can get Taylor while she's still available for you. But
thank you, Pat.
Yeah, Taylor, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure.
You too. Hopefully we get to talk again soon.
Yeah, for sure.